Welcome, everybody. I'm Elisa Meredith, the Content Marketing Manager at Tailwind, and I am very excited to be joined by Sarah Hupel-Scher. Now, did I say your name right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And Sarah is a Product Marketing Manager at Pinterest. So, yay, we're so happy you're here, Sarah.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Now, why is it that we have this great honor? What are we going to do today?
We are going to answer your burning questions. So we've heard a lot of the questions that you have about how to find success on Pinterest and want to share a bit more about how it's done. So I know it sounds like the questions we've gotten have been very savvy so far. So we're excited to dive a bit deeper and give you the latest.
Oh, good. And I know there've been a lot of changes recently to the recommendations and best practices. So we're going to dive into some of those as well.
Yes, that's right. We're investing a lot this year in the success of content creators on Pinterest. And so with that, you have already seen and will continue to see a bunch of exciting new product updates from us. With that comes lots of changes. So we want to make sure that everyone is armed with the latest best practices to make sure that you're able to really maximize the success you're getting on the platform.
Fabulous. Well, we really, really appreciate that. And one of the first things that we wanted to talk about was getting found on Pinterest. So where's my page? So many pages of questions, and I sent them to you, and I thought, okay, there's no way she's going to want to cover all these things. So I'll be happy with whatever we can get. And you were like, let's do it all. So yay. Okay. So for those who are watching live, please feel free to ask your burning questions. We will get to them at the very end so that we can keep things kind of organized, but we want to hear from you as well. And also, please don't forget to share on Facebook so that your friends who may have wanted to come and forgot, because we all forget and it's Monday and it's busy, please do share. So the first thing, like we said, how to get found on Pinterest, Pinterest SEO. Now, here's a big one that comes up. And I know one of the things we love about Pinterest is that Pinterest is very generous with traffic. So we know with other social network platforms, even with Facebook coming right out and saying, look, we're going to limit your reach. And basically, you have to pay to get reach and traffic for your site. This is not the case with Pinterest, and we love you. But one of the things that always comes up, no matter what network we're sharing our content on, is, does it matter when I pin?
So time of day does not matter from our perspective, but do think about the first several pins that you're saving each day, which I know is another hot question. We'll come back to that in a minute. But now that we have the following tab, which we announced a few weeks ago, you might start to see over time that your audience does tend to engage with your content at a certain time of day. But from our perspective, it does not matter what time of day you actually pin.
Okay, so for those who may not be aware of the following tab yet, can you explain what that is?
Yes, sure. So a few weeks ago, we launched a following tab. And basically, this is a dedicated space within the Pinterest app where we just distribute content to the people who follow you or your boards. And so as a pinner, it's a great place to go to exclusively see content from people that you have chosen to follow. And for content creators, it's a really great way to get your content distributed virtually in real time to people that are following you.
Okay, so this is kind of like the old days of Pinterest, right?
Exactly. So over time, we've layered in a lot of new ways where we're suggesting and making recommendations of content beyond what your followers, beyond what those people you follow are pinning. And we know that's really valuable to pinners, but there are times where you just want to see the content from people that you have carefully curated.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. So now we have those three different ways, right? We have the following tab, we have the smart feed, and we also have a hashtag search. So many different ways to get our content found by people and all different ways to make that happen. So
that's right. Hence all the questions.
Hence all the questions. Exactly. Okay. So then the next question, how many times a day should I pin? Is there any such thing as too many pins per day?
Okay. There's definitely no such thing as pinning too much. We love, but I will say we prefer consistency to volume.
Okay.
So if, for example, you're considering saving 15 pins on a Monday and then none until Friday, we would prefer that you save, let's say, 5 on Monday, 5 on Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, to on Thursday, for example.
Okay.
So consistency is better than hitting us all at once and hitting your followers, especially now that we have the following tab with all of those pins at once.
Okay, cool. So I have heard of some people saving maybe 100 pins per day. And that's okay as long as they're relevant and fresh.
Okay, one of the pieces of guidance that we've given over the past few weeks that I know has brought up a lot of questions is to focus on the first 5 or so pins that you save.
Yes, thank you.
So I wanted to demystify that. So now that we have the following tab, we do want to be mindful that we're not like spamming pinners' feeds in the event that someone they follow saves a whole bunch of pins at once. So in the 100 pin example, now with the following tab, you would go there and see only content from that creator, which might not be ideal as a pinner to receive the content all at once.
Right.
And what we want to do is to cause people to unfollow creators whose content they really love just because the volume of it is overwhelming. And so the idea behind this first 5, as it's been called, rule, is that we show the first 5 pins from someone that you follow, then move on to showing the newest pins from the next person that you follow, and so on. So in other words, we'll get back around to showing your next 5 or so pins, but that would appear after content from other people that you follow. So it's all about just spreading it out so that we're not causing people to inadvertently unfollow people who they shouldn't.
That's smart. Okay. So to clarify even more, possibly.
Yeah.
Now you said it's the first 5 of the day, and I think that we learned that starts at midnight UTC.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. So for me here on the East Coast at daylight savings time, that is 8 p.m. So it's going to be different for everybody. So go ahead and Google that. What is UTC in my time zone? Yeah. What is that? So then if I come on it at 8 o'clock, 8:01, and I pin 20 pins, and then somebody who follows me, let's say Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Melissa's here monitoring comments. Thank you. Melissa comes on into her follower tab, and she's going to see at 8:15, she's going to see my first 5.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. Okay. And if she's not following anyone else, for example, or if the other people that she's following have not also pinned within that same time frame, she may see more from you. But in the event that there are several people that she's following that are all adding fresh content, we'll just spread that out a bit so that we're not overwhelming her with your pins.
I see. Well, thank you for that. So then what happens if I start pinning at 8:01, but Melissa doesn't come online until 10:30 at night? Is she going to see the first 5 pins that I pinned at 8:01, or is she going to see ones that I pinned at 9:30?
She will see, I believe, the first 5 that you saved at 8:01. So that tends the direction of like focus on the first 5 or so that you pin each day. Right. I'm experimenting to figure out if that's exactly the right number, but it will be around that, just so that we're kind of sharing the love amongst the different people that a given pinner is following.
Oh, that totally cleared that up for me. So yes, Jennifer Marie says, thank you. That makes way more sense. Yes, thank you. That's perfect. Okay. So it's real time-ish, but depending on when you're on and when people are pinning. Yeah. What I love about this is that it tells people that you do not have to pin 100 pins a day.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it really reinforces the whole consistency is better than, bulk pinning all at once. Because you can imagine that in that scenario, someone might see just those first few pins that you're saving on a particular day, and then they might miss out on the content, which could have otherwise been distributed over the next several days when they would be surface that content once again.
Okay. I love that you found a way to kind of incentivize those best practices. That's cool. Yeah. All right. So more about Smart Feed. We've noticed that comments, the old style comments are gone. And now we have photos and comments. And I noticed on mine anyway that I can't even, I think I couldn't leave a comment unless I also left a photo. And sometimes you have to click over to the comment tab rather than being right there. Is that to try to improve the quality of the comments?
Yeah, exactly. So we've done a couple things. One is that we've made the comments universal across all instances of a given video.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So for your URL for brownie recipes, you're going to see all the comments and pictures for every pin. Love that.
Exactly. So what we've seen over time is that pins that have photo tries, or comments tend to get a lot more engagement. And so in the past, where you might have had 3 instances of that same pin, the brownie recipe, to use your example, all linking back to the same website, and each of those picked up some really valuable tries or comments, those would have been spread out across those 3 instances of the pin. And what we've seen is that by unifying those and putting them all together, we're seeing a ton of engagement, both with the pin itself and people, clicking through on it more, et cetera, but also engaging with the comments themselves. So we've added over the last several months the ability to like a particular comment or reply to a comment. And so we're seeing these really rich conversations happen within that try feed or the comment feed of the pin itself.
That's awesome. I just noticed that last week when somebody pinned an article of mine and I went on and there was already tried it. I thought, where'd that come from? I recognized it from another version of that pin. I thought that is so smart. And that's another way to reward content creators.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's particularly valuable. You see it in certain categories like recipes.
Yeah, totally.
Where people are, the tries are very qualified because someone in many cases is leaving a photo. So that they actually went through the effort of trying the recipe. And I think it brings a lot of credibility to the comments or feedback that they have on that particular pin. Yeah. So we're excited to expand that across even more pins on Pinterest.
That's awesome. So something that people ask who are really into getting found on Pinterest, which is, okay, so what comes first? Is it the comments and photos that are helping us be found in search, or are we being found in search? You know what I'm saying? What comes first?
Yeah, totally. So I think it's likely that they're being found through really great SEO to begin with, and then the tries and comments follow. So when we think about, I think the most common question that we tend to get is, how do you get your pins to actually show up in the home feed, to show up in search results, especially in light of these new surfaces like the following tab? And so I think it's worth taking a moment just to talk about how content gets distributed on Pinterest in general, because it is different than on other platforms, as we all know. So when you save a new pin to Pinterest, we distribute it to your followers first. So that's kind of the testing bed. We say, this is your most loyal audience. These people love your content. Let's give this content to them. Now through the following tab, we can do that much sooner and much earlier and more predictably than we were able to before. And then we see which of those pins are getting good engagement. From there, we can quickly distribute those pins out to a much broader audience beyond just your followers. And that we do by recommending those pins in people's home feeds, by surfacing their pins in search results, in related pins, all of those surfaces across Pinterest. So if you think about the best thing that you can do to get your content surfaced to people beyond your followers, the first piece of advice is kind of unintuitively to make sure it's engaging for your followers, because they're the ones who will quickly give a signal that this is a really great piece of content and that we should distribute it much more broadly. And then the second piece is to treat it with SEO best practices, which I know we're going to get into, so that it will be identified as relevant to other pinners who might be interested in it. So it's great if that particular brownie recipe, for example, really resonated with your followers. But if it doesn't have a ton of rich data, like a pin description, et cetera, that's telling us that it's a brownie recipe made with triple chocolate, that's gluten-free, for example. I don't even know if that's possible.
We're getting hungry.
You can tell it's dessert time for me. Then we might not know to distribute it more broadly to people who are looking for those particular things. So it's really a mix of making sure that the pin content is going to resonate with your followers, but then also making sure that it's beefed up with those SEO best practices in order to get it distributed out to a broader audience who might be looking for that particular type of content, but not yet following you.
Okay. So what happens to somebody who maybe made a mistake and purchased followers? Or they changed their focus of their business. So people followed them because they wanted one kind of content and now they're producing something else.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we would suggest is basically leaning into the content that's really resonating with your audience. You can look in Pinterest Analytics, for example, to see what your top performing pins are, your top performing boards. And that's the type of content that your followers most want to see. So if you lean into that, assuming it's still in line with what your blog is about or what your business is about, we think that will ultimately lead to the right type of followers. That said, if your business has evolved over time, I mean, I would definitely encourage you to not kind of falsely pin. So, if you're pinning content that's related to your new type of business or the new area of content that you're focused on, we will both be doing a lot of the work for you in finding followers that are interested in that particular topic. And then there are a bunch of things that you can do on your own to grow a following around that particular interest as well, which I know we're going to talk about. Okay. So I think it's all about being authentic from this point forward, even if you have amassed a following which might be a bit mixed, or a following that wasn't particularly loyal. I think focus on those that are loyal to the type of content that you're saving today, and I think the rest will follow.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you would even suggest that over, say, starting from scratch?
Yes.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. I'm asking for a friend.
Yes.
Now, here's one that comes up a lot, and this is my friend Kate All of Simple Pin Media's very favorite question. She's going to hit me later. Should we delete underperforming pins to increase our profile's overall engagement rate and hopefully get all of our content out there?
A very popular question. So no. Yeah. So the short answer is no. We don't recommend deleting pins. And there's a few reasons. So first, we know that underperforming pins might not get as much distribution as those that have more engagement, but that won't hurt the distribution of other pins from your profile. So one dud pin, for example, might have a hard time itself, but it's not going to bring the rest of your pins down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Furthermore, we know that that pin could always become relevant or popular at some point in the future. Like, the dud that becomes the cool kid at some point.
That's right. The ugly duckling.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had those. I mean, they just did nothing for months and months, and all of a sudden they just take off out of nowhere. So yeah, I don't spend my time on deleting pins.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's no real downside is kind of the short answer to keeping it on your profile in the meantime. That said, if you're kind of mystified about what's working well and what's not, we think focus on your analytics to understand the type of pins that are the most engaging for your particular audience, which should give you some clues as to where to lean in terms of future content development.
Perfect. Here's one that I had not thought of. This came in on the event. Do backlinks to boards or pins matter? So this probably is a Google SEO person asking, do backlinks count?
They do not.
Oh,
so that's the
okay. That's easy.
Yeah, no, we look almost entirely at the content of that particular pin and where it links to, what it looks like, how rich the description is, etc. But not all of the other places that it links to.
Great.
Or that links. Yeah.
Right. So now we're getting into real SEO here. So where should we use our keywords? And we're talking on Pinterest and off Pinterest because it seems it's all connected.
Yes. So the most important place to add keywords, first and foremost, is in your pin descriptions. And so I think in terms of keywords, I would really try to think about the pinner's mindset when they're looking for your particular flavor of content. And then incorporate those keywords. So you want to make sure that your description includes keywords both about the items in the pin itself, but also any themes that might be related to that pin. So an example that I tend to use is something like, this grilled asparagus recipe is great for a quick weeknight dinner, but also special enough to be a dinner party side vegetable or something like that. So you've embedded in there things like grilled asparagus recipe, which someone might be searching for if they've narrowed down their query to something that's specific. But also you've included really thematic keywords like weeknight dinner or dinner party side or side vegetable, which we also see people search for on Pinterest. And I think that's something that's particularly unique if you're thinking about SEO on Pinterest versus Google. Google tends to be a bit more specific, where Pinterest can range from specific, but really to the broader things like dinner ideas or quick vegetable or kid-friendly vegetable, those types of things too. So when you're thinking about your description, I would think about lacing it with keywords in a way that makes sense to the average person, but that kind of cover that range of thematic to specific item. And you can think about how you might do that for everything from recipes to style ideas and outfits, to travel ideas. So I would kind of have that lens for each of the descriptions I write into what's this specific pin about, and then what are all the broad things that someone might be looking for that I would want this pin to show up for. And then we also take into account keywords in your board titles and board descriptions. as well as your profile description. So those are places too where I would think about just making sure that you're covering off on all of the ways that someone might be looking for a board like this, a person like you, and making sure it's rich with keywords.
Okay, so do the keywords in our description and in our boards, do those help the individual pins perform better?
They do, exactly.
Oh,
so they give us more information about all of the pins on that board. So we've had, I know one question that's come up is we've given the direction to, if you're saving a pin to multiple boards, save it to the most relevant board first. And we've been asked why that. The reason that that pin will get distribution priority, and that pin will bring with it all of the data from that particular board. So
I see.
That's where the pin board relationship becomes really important. So if you have a pin, for example, that's like a Thanksgiving related craft project, and you save it first to a board called crafts and later to a board called everything Thanksgiving, that pin will have all of the keyword data from its own description, which hopefully you've included both Thanksgiving and craft related keywords in. But it also brings with it all of the data from the crafts board and all the information about that board.
That makes so much sense. A lot of us have noticed that when we do a search, like when we're doing a strategy, maybe we do a search and we filter by boards, and we notice that some of the top boards don't have any board descriptions. So we're thinking, are board descriptions really that important then? But they are, because it carries down to the pins in the board. So it's not so much about searching for the board, but about the success of your pins in the board.
Yes, that's exactly. Yep.
Great. All right. Well, mystery solved. So many mystery solved. I can't even stand it.
Yeah. And in general, I think you'll see with a lot of these best practices, it's easy to find an example that's not living up to that, right? So when we say, hey, make sure you add really useful board descriptions full of useful keywords. It's easy to find a board that's surfaced high in the search results and doesn't exhibit that. But you're right, that board probably has a lot of other goodness to it.
Yeah, and maybe its pins don't really do that well in search because the board description is not there.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, in general, it's like add as many, give your pin all of the advantages.
That's what I say too.
All of the advantages that it can have. And some of those may work more in its favor than others, but you don't want to penalize it.
No, true. So does it matter what you name your image that's on the site that you're going to pin?
It does
the
not.
Image name?
Like
oh,
the file name?
Yeah.
No, what we do recommend though is that your pin description matches any like blog post title that's on your site or contains the same keywords, because we're doing a lot to invest in making sure that the content of the pin matches the content of the landing page, and so that's one of the key relationships that we're looking for. But the image file name does not matter as much as any of those other pieces.
Okay, that's great to know. Okay, here's another one.
Okay.
Why should we be adding our content when it's fresh?
Yes, well, we know that pinners love fresh content. That was actually one of the hypotheses behind us introducing hashtags, which I know we'll get to as well. Because hashtags, when you tap into a hashtag and see all of the pins that share that hashtag, it's ordered by recency. And what we've seen is that people really love that fresh new content. But historically, it was kind of hard to find content on Pinterest that was really fresh. However, now that we have the following tab, we have a dedicated place to get your pins in front of your followers while it's fresh. So I think more than ever since the introduction of that surface, it really matters to save it while it's fresh.
Okay, so let's talk about what is fresh. Is it fresh because I just saved the pin? Is it fresh because it's a new blog post? Is it fresh because it's a second image I made for an old blog post? What makes it fresh?
Ooh, good question. I mean, our favorite type of fresh content is it's brand new content in the world. So it's a blog post that you just wrote. But I think those other categories count as fresh as well.
So a brand new pin from like a 2-year-old blog post is still fresh?
Yes, it's still fresh. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Here's another kind of related one. Okay. So the best practices now say that make sure that your pin image is on the landing page it links to. Why? So people are asking, what if I have multiple images? Do I have to actually physically show them all? What's going on?
Yeah, this is actually a best practice that we're updating. So I'll give you, I mean, as soon as they're written, they're basically ready to be updated. Of course, yeah. So I'll give you the latest and greatest, which is it doesn't have to be the exact image. So the image in your pin does not need to be a mirror image of anything that's on your landing page, but we want to make sure it's relevant to the content of the landing page. That said, as we talked about before, it's less about the image itself, but really it's about making sure that the description of the pin matches the title of the page it's linking to. So we're doing a ton to invest in making sure that a pin matches the contents of the page that it's linking to.
Yeah.
And so image is one of those pieces. Like, it shouldn't be totally off base. It shouldn't feel like a weird mismatch if you click through on the pin. But that exact image does not need to appear on the landing page.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay. So as far as our pinning activity, we want to get into the smart feed, which is when you get on Pinterest, that's the default page you land on. And that's the one that's full of recommendations, some from people you follow, some promoted pins. So is there an advantage in getting onto that smart feed or even into search by pinning live exclusively, or even just a couple times a week versus using an approved scheduler?
No, there actually isn't. So we don't penalize creators who pin via a scheduler or any kind of third-party tool. That said, we recommend logging into Pinterest at least once in a while. Once you can see the latest and greatest features that we're launching and kind of try them out. And also just so you can continue to use the product as your consumers do.
Oh, yeah.
You experience your content in that same environment.
Right.
But there's definitely no distribution priority given to pins that are saved natively in Pinterest versus through a third-party tool.
Okay, so it's not even a case where Pinterest likes to see that you're active on the platform itself?
You're considered active if you are saving content regularly.
Okay.
So those are the key things. And when we've talked about kind of with the new following tab, we're finding new ways to basically recommend creators for pinners to follow. You'll notice that both within the following tab itself, but we're playing with new recommendation spaces in the Explore tab, for instance, where we're recommending creators to follow. So we're doing a lot of work, and we'll be experimenting with even more places where we're trying to matchmake between creators who have really good content and people who are interested in particular topics. But I will say, to be eligible to be shown to pinners as a recommended creator to follow, there are a few key things. So one is make sure you're saving pins regularly, and that can be, again, through a third-party tool is absolutely fine. That counts. Ideally, those pins link back to your own website. Like, that's our most favorite type of fresh content that we want to see. You want to make sure you have a business account, and you want to make sure you've claimed your website. So those are kind of like table stakes to be shown up in all of those places throughout Pinterest where we're recommending creators for pinners to follow.
Are there any extra credit things we can do?
I mean, I would say there are certain places where we're playing with, like, is this content creator really engaging at this particular type of content? So it's all the same best practices that you would use for following tab or just Pinterest in general. But no, like in terms of pure eligibility, it's business account, it's claimed website, and then it's saving content regularly. Okay,
excellent. So you kind of already answered this, but I want to call it out specifically. So is there any advantage to you as the original pinner when somebody repins your pin versus them going to your website and pinning a brand new pin?
So as the content creator, it's best for you to save a fresh version of it. So for you to be the first pinner of that particular type of content instead of repinning it. And the reason is that we prioritize pins that were created by the owner of the website that those pins link to. So we talked about claiming your website and how important that is. So then we see when you're saving a piece of fresh content from your website, like, ooh, this is coming from the person that actually owns this content. And so we do give distribution priority to it. We also know that when it's yours, you can add relevant hashtags. You can make sure it's saved as soon as it exists. It gets distributed through the following tab once, kind of as soon as it's fresh, which are also great benefits.
Awesome. Now, let's say my pin is out there for my new blog post. Would I prefer that Sarah goes and repins that pin to kind of give it some engagement, or would I prefer that she goes to my blog and pins it from there?
Ooh, good question. I actually think, I mean, we're always experimenting with the algorithm. Exact answer to this. But my suspicion is that actually either of those would be great. for different reasons. So one,
Yeah.
you know, if I'm repinning your pin, let's say from my following tab, that's great, because if I'm following you, it's clear that I'm engaging with your content. And I find that particular piece of content compelling and am giving Pinterest a signal that it should be distributed more broadly. If I'm going to your blog and saving it, that also tells us that we find that everyday pinners find that content really valuable. And as we see more instances of that same pin show up across Pinterest, that also tells us that that's a pin worth distributing.
Okay. So you want both, basically.
Yeah, both are great.
Okay, cool. All right. Now here's one. Is it okay to pin the same image? Now we know it's okay to pin the same image to multiple boards as long as they're relevant, but is it okay, like a month after I first pin it, to pin the same image to the same board?
Sure. I would say just make sure a couple things. Either make sure each pin has a unique description. So like, why is this relevant once again, for example? That will make it feel like truly a new pin. And then I would just keep in mind the pinner's experience. If they see both pins either in their following tab, or if they go and visit your profile and they see both pins appearing on the board, will it make sense to them? And so I think that gets to spacing, right? So we don't recommend looping just for the sake of looping, but rather as it feels seasonally appropriate. So for example, it's perfectly appropriate to resurface a really popular Halloween pin every fall, for example. Even if I've saved it as a pinner, I might have forgotten about it. And if that shows up in my following tab again, I don't think that's a bad experience. If I'm seeing that pin every single week in my following tab, that starts to feel weird, I think. And so I would just really think about the pinner's mindset and how like wonderful and delightful it will feel if they discover it a second time, or if it will feel just kind of burdensome.
Okay, so there really isn't any SEO value to just kind of mindlessly repeating and repeating. Okay, good to know. All right. So let's talk a little bit about followers. We've been talking about them a lot. So followers matter quite a bit. Do you have any suggestions on how to get more followers, get more engaged followers?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in general, one thing to keep in mind is that followers still represent a small portion of the total people that you reach on Pinterest. So this has changed. And actually, when we announced last week our new business profile rolling out, you will see now that prominently on the profile itself, we're showing a number different than followers, which is the total number of people that you're reaching on average each month. And so definitely encourage you to check out that number and the relationship between that number and your follower count. Generally, for most creators, they're reaching a much larger population than just followers. So I think as we've introduced the following tab and are talking more about followers, I would still keep that in mind. Like, the vast majority of your distribution is still going to happen beyond your followers. So that's where like all of these SEO best practices become really important. That said, before we had the following tab, your content was still distributed to your followers first, but they couldn't easily separate that from the other recommended ideas in their home feed.
Right.
So now that they have a dedicated space to see content from people and brands that they're following, we know that there should be more of a focus from content creators on building that authentic following. So the key here is that the quality is more important than quantity. For all of those reasons that we talked about, where first we kind of push a piece of fresh content out to your followers and we see how much engagement it gets. So definitely better to have a highly engaged, smaller number of followers than a really under-engaged large number of followers. So that's the first thing. In terms of how to build that audience, I think there's a few things. One is as I talked about, we'll be doing a bunch of stuff to recommend you as a creator to follow to pinners who are interested in your type of content. So that's where business account, claiming your website, pinning regularly, those are kind of general hygiene that will tell us that you're a high quality creator and that we should be recommending you to more people. Then when you've kind of covered your bases on that front and you're saving fresh content regularly, you can focus on building your own authentic following on Pinterest. And there's a couple best practices there. One is adding the follow button to your website or your blog. That's a pretty easy snippet of code to add into your blog and lets people who are consuming your blog content easily follow you on Pinterest. And then secondly, making sure that your followers on other channels know that you're on Pinterest as well. So just reminding them that you're saving fresh content, etc. You also brought up Tried It earlier, and like encouraging people to add their photos or comments to one of your pins that they've tried. And I actually think that's a great way to encourage people to find you on Pinterest too, and make sure that readers of your blog, for example, are following you on Pinterest. So we've seen some early folks say things like, here's my latest brownie recipe, again, with brownies.
Yeah, right.
Here's a great brownie recipe. And they will embed the pin right on their blog post. So we also have a pin widget where you embed the pin itself. And you can actually encourage your audience, like, hey, try this out and leave a photo or comment on the pin so that I can see how it's going. And so that's a good way to kind of tie in, one, something that's going to get your pin a lot more engagement because people are going to be viewing that pin, hopefully adding photos to the pin, adding comments to the pin. But also once they're viewing the pin, if they're not following you already, it's a really natural step for them to do that. So that's another kind of nice way to both, take your most loyal audience, which are readers and engagers with your blog, and make sure that they're engaging with you on Pinterest as well.
Perfect. I need to ask about how do you get more Tried It's on your pins? So that's a great one to get it right from your blog. Yeah,
that's a great one. I think we're seeing it as a kind of a win-win for creators because you can not only see all of the engagement then across your pin, but as that pin then gets more engagement, it will encourage other people to engage with your pin. So it's a nice way for you to keep track as a creator of all of the people who are taking action, but also to make your content work harder for you at the same time.
Excellent. So how much activity is taking place on our profiles as opposed to in search and the follower tab, other places?
Yeah, so a majority of engagement is still taking place in the discovery spaces on Pinterest, so the home feed, search results, related pins, etc. That said, as we continue to introduce these new ways for people to find creators to follow, we expect views of profiles to probably go up somewhat. But I would expect that engagement will continue to happen kind of off the profile for the most part. So the new profile that we announced last week was designed with that in mind. So it's designed to be both customizable for creators, where you can set up, for example, like the source of the pins that show up, the tilted pins that show up at the top. But also really easy to manage. So because you're setting the source for that, for example, it kind of updates on its own as you're saving fresh content, depending on how you've set that up. So hopefully you're not finding yourself having to spend a ton of time managing your profile, since we know that most of your content will still get discovered across Pinterest. And if you're you have limited time and you're deciding between SEO practices on your pins themselves or a lot of time spiffing up your profile, I would definitely spend your time on the former. So on making sure that your pins are optimized for search and discovery.
Oh yeah, I know a lot of people like to have board covers on all their Pinterest boards so that they look pretty, but it seems like that image size changes all the time. And do you think it's worth the time to keep up with those?
I mean, I know it's really important to some people, and I think, I get it. Like for some people, it's part of their brand that their profile is like very aesthetically pleasing. So I get that, but I think, more bang for your buck is definitely spent on the pins themselves.
Okay. All right. Now I want to talk about hashtags, because hashtags were a no-no on Pinterest forever. And then what was it, last summer they came back?
I think it was last summer. Yeah, it still feels like a fresh development over here as well.
It does.
What we've seen is that hashtagged pins do get significantly more distribution the first day that they're saved to Pinterest. So we were talking before about what's the point of fresh pins, and I think that's one where we've really seen that people want to engage with this type of content as soon as it's relevant. And so we do allow creators to add up to 20 relevant hashtags to a given pin. Again, my guidance here would be quality over quantity, and focusing on thematic hashtags. So things like spring style, Instapot recipes, like general themes that people might want to see the latest and greatest in. And that's where we're seeing a really good uptick in engagement with hashtags.
So do you know if people are actually searching hashtags, or is it more like they're clicking on the hashtag in a description?
It's actually a little bit of both. Yeah,
Okay.
we're testing a bunch of new places to distribute
Yeah.
them as well, whether it's in searches or in kind of recommended searches within your home feed, et cetera. So I think as we play around with different places to surface them, we might see that change as well.
Okay.
But we are seeing both happen. So people both, going deep down the rabbit hole on Pinterest, using hashtags, or just looking for a particular topic and then getting really excited by the fresh content that hashtags are surfacing.
Nice. Okay, so what about a local business? Is it possible for them to do well on Pinterest?
Yeah, so a business that doesn't have national distribution.
Right. Mm-hmm. Let's say like it's a tile installer in New Jersey.
Ooh. Yes. So we have over 200 million monthly active users on Pinterest. So I think the takeaway from that is that no matter where you are, you should be able to find your local audience on Pinterest. I think the key is optimizing your content to help pinners in your local area actually discover your content. So if I were doing that, I would focus on using hashtags and pin descriptions that include your geographic terms. I might even include the relevant geographic area in my profile description, or maybe even my profile name, so that as people are searching, it feels very relevant, and you're kind of tailoring. You don't want to limit your distribution, but really, if you're a local business, right? I would think about the SEO strategy and all of those keywords. I would apply that to my local geography.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about effective pin images, because it has a lot to do with the images, right? So the optimal ratio we've been given now on the best practices and creative page is 2 to 3. And I love that you guys said, okay, these ratios are confusing to some people, so let's give them numbers, right? So we said 600 by 900 is the optimal. So it also mentioned squares can work well, but it also said that 600 by 1260 will show up in the entirety, but any longer will get cut off. So what is it?
Why you're confused?
I'm sorry. I know, so needy, but so then are there a couple of best ratios, or is it just one? And what happens if we use one that's not the best?
Yeah, so I would say 2 to 3 is recommended. So what that means is if you deviate much from that, particularly if you go much taller than that, you might see less distribution of your pins, or they might be cut off in certain parts of the app. So I think you've hit upon the fact that we're playing with a lot of different levers, which is very different guidance over time. But 2 to 3 is a really safe ratio in terms of a max. So I would recommend sticking to that or lower, and you shouldn't see any harm in distribution then.
Okay, and it's really been that way for a very long time. It's just now we have pixels given.
Exactly, pixels given, and I think previously we might have truncated the pin, right? So you didn't see all of it in the feed itself, but you could expand and see it. And now in some places we're actually not showing a pin if it's super long. So I think there have been some changes over time, but 2 to 3 is a safe ratio.
Okay. I mean, some people are saying, well, my best pins are still the extra long ones. And it seems to me like these things are still kind of rolling out. Is that the case?
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think they're not the same restrictions everywhere across the app or across all mobile platforms either. So that's why we give 2 to 3 as recommended guidance. That's kind of your safest ratio across all of the spaces. You can certainly go smaller, so squares work. But as people who've been on Pinterest a long time know, vertical pins do tend to perform better just because you're getting more real estate in the feed.
Sure.
And so that's where the 2 to 3 comes from.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That one was really coming up a lot.
On art, a little bit about.
I get it. Okay. This one is super related, and I think we have the answer already. But for a while, we were noticing that a lot of pins were being cut cut off as squares. Is that something we should plan for, or is that just kind of a test?
Nope. That might have been a temporary experiment that we were running. I think we're back to the 2:3 ratio. So that's where we've seen kind of optimal pin performance.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, and here's one I didn't write down. So, is it still true that pins without faces that use warm colors do better than, say, cooler colors and faces?
Interesting. I had seen something about the faces like several years ago, but I have not seen any updated guidance on that.
Okay.
And I know that as we've made kind of Pinterest house pins over the years, I have not seen that hold true. So I would say it probably depends a lot on the category of the content that you're saving. So I would definitely recommend experimenting with that on your own. And just see what works best for your brand or your business.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I notice a lot of the fashion pins will show like huge sunglasses and hats, so you only see a little bit of the face, or they cut them off here, or something else where you can't really see. So I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of room to experiment, but.
Yeah, that's right. And I've heard different guidance. Like I've heard some people say, oh, for beauty, no one ever wants to see a face, which is interesting. The style they do. And so I really think there's like no hard and fast rule on that one. And it's worth figuring out for yourself what performs best.
Great. And that kind of does play into this one about lifestyle images.
Yes.
That's what recommended rather than just a single product on a white background. You're recommending a lifestyle image. Why does that work, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think in general, and this is what we see with descriptions too, people are looking for help in contextualizing a given product or a given image. So it's like, oh, this is a great product, but like, tell me how I would use it in my day-to-day life, or, tell me how I would style it. And so we've seen success. I won't say that product pins have not been successful across the board. We've seen some really good examples of it, but I think the product pins that tend to be really successful are really beautifully shot. They're really thinking about dimension. So it's like not just a tiny image on a white background, but like you can really get a feel for the product. And then they often have either helpful text overlays or really helpful descriptions that are doing the work of a lifestyle image, which is, you could wear this hat to brunch, or you could wear it to the beach. I mean, an image does that work for you by showing you what it actually looks like in the context of an outfit, for example. But if you don't have lifestyle images, you can get around it with really creative descriptions, I think.
Oh, that's good. And then what is tasteful branding? Tasteful branding. That's suggested.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what we see is that it doesn't hurt performance. So if you, I don't think we've seen a huge increase in engagement by including tasteful branding, but I think as us marketers know, if you can get away with getting your brand in there somehow without it hurting performance, that feels helpful. So
a little awareness, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a little bit of brand awareness, particularly as that pin kind of travels downstream and other people save it, and someone might discover not your original version of it, but one that was saved by someone else and saved by someone else and saved by someone else. And down the line, they're not seeing as strong of an association with your brand as the person who originally saw it come from you. And so branding is kind of a nice way to ensure that pin maintains your legacy. But I do think tasteful branding is key. So I think focusing on the fact that the image is not about, thank you so much, just really about, my laptop was about to die. So
Time.
Yeah, the Pinterest elves were very helpful to me. And so, what we've seen is that if you include a little logo or, a small brand name somewhere on that particular pin, it doesn't hurt performance at all.
Okay.
So I think that's another best practice for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So my theory is, and you can tell me if I'm off on this, but I feel like as a pinner, if I see that brand and I click on the pin and I go to the site, I'm expecting that that's where I'm going to go. And it starts to kind of build that trust from the beginning. That's
exactly right. And I think that's another case where when you think about building an authentic following of people who really love the content that you're saving, that can happen as well from that tasteful branding. So even if they're discovering it down the road when it was saved by someone else that they follow, for example, they know that you were the original source of it, and I think that's driving a lot of credibility and hopefully driving those people to follow you as well.
Great. Okay. And something kind of,
Oh, second time out to
please.
plug in.
Yes, of course. It's so great to see everybody here.
Okay.
So,
I'm done.
okay.
I
Yeah,
didn't want to, that felt like it would be a very dramatic and abrupt ending to the
it
webinar.
sure would. Yes, it would be very sad. Now, you also gave a really helpful tip to avoid logo placement in the corner of the pin.
Yeah,
and why was that?
So a couple years ago, we introduced our visual search product, so Lens, which enables you to actually search in on any particular part of the pin image and then see related pin results. And so over time, we've experimented with putting that little visual search entry point in various corners of the pin.
Okay.
I think the current version of my app right now has it in the lower right, but we've experimented with it in the bottom right, for example. And I think it depends on the platform that you're on too and where we're seeing the strongest performance from it. But because of that, we've recommended that if you are incorporating a text overlay or logo placement or something like that, to avoid the corners because you don't want that to get covered up by that icon. So we've seen some people be really successful in including it in the either top center or bottom center of the pin itself.
Okay. And you did touch on text on the image. So what kind of text is good on an image?
I would think about text on the image if it helps explain what the image is or contextualizes it further. So trying to think of a good example. It's, I can see it working in a couple different ways. So one is if the image itself cannot tell the full story of what the underlying content is. So it might be, let's say it's like a beautiful image of an Italian villa, but your underlying blog is about like the five great agriturismos to explore with kids, for example. And so you just like can't get all of that information across in a single image, or if you can, you're a real master. It's hard.
Exactly.
At least not in a 2:3 ratio pin. And so that's where a text overlay can be really helpful in just explaining and kind of setting the expectation of what the reader will find upon click through. So that's one great place. The other is when we were talking about product pins before. If you don't have lifestyle images and you just have product pins, it's a really great way of just making those a little bit more resonant with people. So it could be like the best hat for spring, or the one product that you need when you have a baby. You can add some of that a lifestyle image would otherwise have.
Yeah, that's super important for bloggers. I know there's no way for me to write an article about promoted pins and have it look like it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a one.
Yeah, it is. So what is happening with pin descriptions? Sometimes I don't see anything. Sometimes I see just a rich pin. And so what should we expect? Do you know?
So at this point, pin descriptions are visible in the feed for almost all users. So I will say that I've experimented at points with, for example, not showing pin descriptions to brand new users because they are confused. So there are certain experiments that we've been running to see whether descriptions are an improvement of a performance driver for every type of user. But in general, they are visible in the feed for almost all users. We are always experimenting to figure out just the right amount of the description to show in the feed. So you might see like this week it's 2 lines of text and next week I see the full description. That's something that we're constantly testing with. But we do know that when users expand descriptions, even if we're only showing a couple of lines in the feed, we do see stronger performance on longer, more helpful descriptions that contain more information about the pin. So I wouldn't try to optimize and fit my description into whatever the latest was that I saw. I would make sure it's helpful as a description and kind of as long as it needs to be, and know that people who are interested in that pin will do the work of expanding it and reading it. The other thing we've seen from descriptions is that a strong call to action, so thinking something like shop or make or find more like this, will encourage people to click through on the pin as well. So if you are trying to drive traffic to your site, that's a good best practice too. Kind of tell people what more lies beyond the click through. So you're kind of telling them, read more about XYZ.
Okay. So you maybe remember, like I do, the early days of Google search where people would keyword stuff their page descriptions.
Yes.
And I'm afraid I do see some of that on Pinterest. So is it helpful to have like keyword and then pipe, keyword, pipe? Does that work?
No, so I think it's a
Okay.
balance, right? Like it's different on Pinterest because people are like the description is doing double duty. So that's how I would think about it. One, it's containing a bunch of keywords that are going to get that pin surface when someone is searching for something relevant. And so in that case, you want it filled with, all of that keyword goodness. At the same time, though, it's basically encouraging someone to click through when they discover that pin elsewhere in the app. And so you don't want that to feel like kind of mumbo jumbo, if I click through, this feels like I might be taken to just like a site of words, of random words. You want it to feel editorialized and like there's a real human behind it because that's going to encourage the click through. So I think make it sound natural, make it sound human, give it that editorial polish. But do be cognizant of it containing the relevant keywords that are going to bring it up in search results.
Okay. Cool. So should I be pinning other people's content?
Repinning or like?
Should I be, I mean, why not just pin all my own blog posts only?
Oh, yeah. So you certainly are welcome to repin. And I think what we've seen is that our creators have a really good kind of curatorial eye. And so
Okay.
what you recommend is that you start with your own content because that's what you want to prioritize for distribution. So when you're thinking about those first several pins that you're saving every day, for example, make sure you're focusing on the ones that are original to you, that are coming from your particular site and that are fresh. But we also talked about consistent pinning really benefiting you as a creator. And so if you don't have fresh content of your own from your website to save every day, then definitely fill in the gaps by pinning other content that you think will resonate with your audience. So we know that people value that in our content creators as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I get that question a lot. What's the ratio? What's the magic ratio of my content to other people's? And I say, well, if you're blogging 10 times a day, you really don't need to pin anybody else's content. But who can do that?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. There's definitely no magic ratio that we're looking for, but just know that the first ones that you save, particularly those that link back to the website that you've claimed with your account, will be prioritized for distribution. So definitely put your energy there. But if you are out of content for the day, or for the week, definitely repin content that you think will resonate with your audience.
Okay, cool. 2 quick questions before we get to the big ones and the audience questions. Okay, so how can an online store owner use Pinterest effectively if they're not blogging?
Good question. I think this gets back to the product pin topic. So if you don't have lifestyle imagery, I mean, I think if you're not blogging, that's one thing. If you have lifestyle images on your store, so for example, like if you think about a given product description page, and maybe you have 5 images associated with a particular product, and one is the front and one is the back and one is the up close, and one happens to be the kind of lifestyle shot of how it's worn, prioritize that one. Like that's the one that you save first to Pinterest. If you don't have that type of content and you just have straight product shots, then it's everything that we were talking about before. I would focus on the dimensions of that pin. So try to still make it vertical and have the product, kind of show up as prominently within those pin dimensions as possible. Utilize text overlays if they would be useful to you, and definitely descriptions. So if you don't have that lifestyle image to do the work for you, then I would focus on the descriptions of explaining what the product is, how it can be used, and encourage people to actually click through to your store to see more and learn more.
Okay, excellent. And now I know Pinterest has invested a lot in Lens, which is a visual search program. So how can a business use that if they're not in something like fashion or home decor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think today there's not an explicit way to have your content surfaced in visual search results, for example, beyond all of the standard SEO best practices. So definitely still encourage you to focus on that. We did introduce last year something called pin codes, which is kind of our version of QR codes, but activated through Lens. And one thing that's kind of a lesser known feature of pin codes is that anyone with a business account can create one. can create a pin code for a given board or for their profile.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best way for a small business to take advantage of Lens. I would think about using it in a few different ways. One is if you have a physical store, you can actually contextualize products that you're selling by printing out a pin code for one of your boards that shows all of the ways that that product can be used.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. So if you're selling anything from, let's say, strawberry jam, you could actually include a physical pin code in your store that drives to a board of things that you can do with jam, like recipes that you can make. If it's a fashion item, you can link to a board of style inspiration, for example. So that's one way of using it. You can also, and you do that by going to a particular board on your profile, and then there's actually a link right there. I think it's 3 dots, but I'm not sure if the link. Check in a minute.
We'll check.
From the board view that says create pin code, and it will auto generate. That's totally free if you have a business account. You can also do that from your profile itself by clicking on your profile picture. And so that will produce a pin code that's unique to your Pinterest profile. If you want to put that on your business card, if you're going to a conference and are handing out collateral and want to encourage people to follow you on Pinterest, that's a great thing to include. It will link anyone who uses it directly to your profile, which makes it super easy for them to follow you. So that's how I would think about using Lens.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so you're right. If you go to your board and next to the edit pencil, there are three dots. You click on that.
Okay, yeah. I did not spread misinformation.
Not at all. No. Okay, so here's the big one. Everybody would like to know what's going on with stolen pins and what are we talking about?
We hear you on the pain that this causes, I will say, first of all. This is one that is really concerning to us as well. So we're actively working on a number of techniques to combat this and would love for all of you to help us in this quest. So one thing I would say is you should already be seeing an improvement because we've been aggressively investing in domain quality. So we talked earlier about everything that we're doing to make sure that the content of the landing page matches the content of the pin itself. Less about the image, but more about like truly the content. Like, is the content on that landing page helpful? Is it rich? And does it match what the pin promised? And so there's a ton happening on our front to invest in that. We think it's just super important to the pinner experience that that landing page content lives up to the promise of the pin that they clicked on. So yeah.
So if anybody's joining and they're not familiar with what we're talking about, this is where spammers basically will take your image and take your pin and link it to their own websites. Yes. So it's not unique to Pinterest by any means. It happens anywhere there's good content to be hijacked.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I will just say, like, we are so invested in making sure that the original creator of a piece of content is the one that's getting the benefit of the distribution. And so we want you to help us in this. We're totally on the same team here in wanting to combat these spammers. And so I saw one of the questions that came through in advance was around specifically how to, like, what to do if you see this happening. Mm-hmm. And so if you see it happening on your own pins, definitely please reach out to us.
Okay, how do we do that?
Yeah, so you can reach out directly through our help channels and link that pin that you're seeing. Like, let us know that you're the copyright owner of it and that you see it linking out to somewhere other than where it should be. Okay. And then that will surely get it reviewed. I saw one of the questions too, which is a really great one, was what if I see pins that belong to blogger friends of mine that this is happening to? So if I'm not the copyright owner myself and so can't file a DMCA request, for example, but what can I do about it? And I think it's a really great question. It speaks to how amazing this community is too. And so the question I think specifically asked, if you flag a pin, which is the best flag to use? Like, there's one that says this is spam. There's one that says this pin has a broken link, and there's one that says, I think the image doesn't appear on the site or something to that.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Of those, the best option is definitely number 3. So if you flag it as spam, it might inadvertently flag the image itself as spam. So you don't want to hurt your blogger friend's image for distribution. If you choose that second one around a broken link, our systems might detect the link in fact is not broken and it does drive somewhere. And so we might kind of override that. So I would definitely say if you're flagging it in that way, use that option which says this pin isn't useful, the image doesn't appear on the site, because that will trigger it for review. We'd also recommend in that case reaching out to the copyright owner and advising him or her that you're seeing this with the pin link so they can funnel their request to us as the copyright owner.
Okay.
And finally, if you consistently are seeing a particular domain that's redirecting traffic illegally, please let us know through our help channels. That will ensure that we actually review that domain in question and take the appropriate action.
Great. So we have kind of a follow-up question to that. If we see our pin, that's our pin, you mentioned sending a message through support. So that's better than the report pin when it's your own, because this is my intellectual property.
Yeah,
option.
I would probably do both, to be honest.
Okay.
I think I would use the intellectual property one first, because I do think that filters the request to the appropriate folks. But again, this is an issue that we're investing in heavily, so there's no harm in kind of taking both channels and ensuring that it gets looked at by a couple people.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so now we have some questions from people. This one is from Holly Elliott, and it says, what about keeping or deleting pins for physical products that are no longer available?
Ooh, great question. I would say the best case scenario, if you have the time, is to actually go through and do one of two things. Either update the link on that pin to a similar product that is still in stock, or redirect that pin either from your side or from the pin itself to a general category of products that will have in stock longevity. I would not actually bother with deleting the pin itself. I will say if it's driving to a broken link, we will likely stop distributing it anyway. So that's where I would kind of weigh the choices. I would not waste my time on deleting it, but know that if that link that it was driving to is a broken link, it will get penalized on our side. And so that's where I would consider a redirect, either manually on the pin itself or on your end from that out of stock product.
Yeah. I feel like maybe some beginning online retailers aren't really comfortable with the redirect, so maybe they could just update the page, like never delete a product page from now on, and put on that maybe a link. Here's something similar, so at least there's something.
Yes, exactly. And I think the most successful execution we've seen on that is usually something to that effect, like, oh no, this one is no longer in stock, but check out what is, and driving to a category page on your site that will contain more in stock like items.
Okay.
That one should carry on. That should have the longest shelf life of the possible solutions, so that you're not constantly changing links.
Okay. And then we have one here from Kaylin Miller. Should we go back and edit the keywords of underperforming pins? And will doing that have any effect on the pin performance?
Oh, that's a great question. What I would probably do in that case is actually create a new pin with a new description. So basically linking to that same type of content, but with a more helpful kind of keyword-rich description. For all the reasons that we talked about before, I wouldn't delete an old pin. But I think that's a case where saving a fresh version of it with an up-to-date, really strong description would probably help.
Makes sense. Okay. And then we have a question from Mogens Christensen about non-English text. So they're a Danish company and most of their pins are in Danish. So how do you do that with distribution in mind? And also a part of that, is it going to be only people who've registered with Danish language who are going to see that? How does that work?
That's a great question. So we definitely prioritize the distribution of content in the local language. Or from that particular market, just to make sure that the content is actionable. So the good news is we have users in Denmark. So we probably take your Danish content. That said, there are certain categories of content where we know that the language matters less. So things like beautiful photography or art. In those cases, people don't care as much where it comes from. They actually really value the international nature of it. And so if the content falls into one of those categories, we will likely distribute it more broadly. So I would say focus the pin description and kind of all of the keywords on the same language that the landing page is in, because we want to make sure that we're first distributing it to people for whom it's the most actionable. And then we'll do the rest in terms of broadening that audience if it feels appropriate for that particular category of content.
Excellent. Glad that came up. Okay, I get this one a lot. Should I go back and add hashtags to older pins?
No.
Okay, why not?
Nope, that's it. Because hashtags are a mechanism for us to focus on distributing fresh content, we're really paying attention to hashtags on brand new pins to Pinterest. So it's not worth your time, to be totally honest.
Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, here's a good one. How do you find keywords on
that's
Pinterest?
Yeah. So I'll tell you my preferred method, which is a little bit of a Pinterest hack, and that is to actually use guided search. So let's say let's do the grilled asparagus example. So you have a grilled asparagus pin. I would actually, did we lose Elisa?
Nope.
I would actually go ahead and search on Pinterest for asparagus recipe. And along the top of the search results, you will see search tiles come up for all kinds of related search terms. And those are actually driven by real searches that people have made in the past. So for example, when we see someone search for asparagus, we see them search for maybe grilled or roasted or easy or kid-friendly. All of those words along the top are literally based on what people are already searching for. And so that's my best suggestion for finding keywords. If you're stumped, start there, because it's going to match to the broadest set of things that people are already searching for.
Perfect. So we're sharing that on the screen right now. And if I click on one, like,
did we lose Elisa?
You can't hear me? Uh-oh.
Well, I can sign off here. Oh, Melissa can hear both of us.
Yeah.
I'm apparently the only one who can
hear
Lisa.
No. Okay. Yeah, so we were sharing the screen to show the guided search. And
okay.
There it is.
I might stop there because I actually can't hear anyone else speaking. Actually, let me jump off and try to rejoin real quick just to see if that helps to solve the problem.
Great, please.
I'll be right back.
Okay, so I can take a couple of them. We have a question from Jacqueline about the following tab or the smart feed. Which one is the default? And it is the smart feed. That's what you see. I'm going to add her back in there. Hi.
I'm back. Hello. Sorry.
Hello. That's so funny. Everybody could hear both of us, but you just couldn't hear me.
Oh, I can hear or see you.
Very strange.
Did you hear my answer on the finding keywords?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. In fact, I did a little screen share while you were talking so people could see. Yeah. So I shared, I searched for grilled asparagus and we got grilled asparagus recipes, foil, all that stuff. Something I use, and you can tell me if this is a good idea, is I enter after I do that search, and then it comes up with all that, the guided search, like in foil. So I might say, oh, okay, then grilled asparagus and foil will be a great thing to write about.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I would even if it were a grilled asparagus recipe, I might keep my original search as general as possible. So I would probably even search for like asparagus or asparagus recipe, because that's going to bring up even more of those related terms that will be helpful to you. Obviously, you can leave out the ones that are not relevant to your recipe. Like if it's a grilled recipe, you probably don't want to include the keyword roasted.
Right.
But if kid-friendly or dinner party or something like that is coming up, that would be a great one to include.
All right. Very nice. Okay. So, okay, we're going to get back into the first 5.
Okay.
So this sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's not. So if 2 content creators are saving their content and walking into a bar at the beginning of the day and they have followers in common, how do you determine whose content is seen by their followers first?
I think it's literally chronological at that point. So I think it's whoever pinned first, for example. So we try to keep the following tab in particular as chronological as possible. So if content creator 1 is pinning something, and then content creator 2 pins another one, and then content creator 1 pins a second pin, like you would likely see them in that order. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now this is something I've noticed too. When you follow somebody, you're not following the group boards that they're on, it seems. So how do group boards grow their following?
Good question. I mean, we have heard this question asked a lot, like should I use group boards as a tool to grow my following? I mean, I would say in general, we prioritize distribution of content to people that follow all of your boards, not just a group board. So I think I wouldn't use it as like a hack to follower growth. I mean, I think certainly people are invested in seeing what you're collaborating on. Excuse me. So if it's a real thing that you're collaborating on with a few people, by all means, create a group board. But I wouldn't do that as just a hack to kind of try to grow my following. I would focus more on those other tactics of including the follow widget on my site, including the pin widget on my site, encouraging people to follow me on Pinterest instead of going the group board route.
Okay. But if we're not looking at it as a way to grow followers for ourselves, we're looking more as a way to distribute content. Does that still work?
So basically, would my followers see content that I have saved to a group board?
Yeah. Or if somebody follows a group board that you're on, but they don't follow you, when you add to the group board, they see your pins in their follower tab.
They should, I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
They wouldn't see other content that you're following, or sorry, that you're saving to other boards.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's still value there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Claire wants to know, as far as sharing super relevant content, if you pin mostly home decor and have like a home decor account, is it going to hurt you if you add in some travel boards and some fashion boards?
It's a great question. I don't think it will hurt you. I would think about, I mean, we know that most pinners on Pinterest do have these like multifaceted interests.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely focus on like tangential categories. So I think the example that you just gave, I think you said food to travel. Is that right?
Home decor to travel and fashion.
Yeah, I think those like all feel similar enough, especially if stylistically there's some unity involved. I think that will appeal still to most pinners.
Okay.
I think if you're like drastically switching categories, that can be tough. And in that case, I might encourage you to, like, if you have a new board that's of a totally different category, think about how you might just grow followers of that particular board. So, you know, maybe embedding that board, for example, in a board widget on your blog post and encouraging people to follow that board. Those are some examples. I would try to make the things that you say generally appeal to the audience that you've authentically created.
Right, because what you don't want to do is what I did, which is to pin about social media and marketing, and then decide I'm just going to be me on Pinterest, and then start pinning all these fitness and keto recipes, and then you get all these followers who do not care at all about your marketing. So Pinterest thinks, oh, her stuff is not engaging.
Yeah, that's a tough case. I think there's probably a lot of crossover between keto recipes and social media marketing, but you never know. Yeah, for something like that, if I were to like go back in history and redo it, I would probably separate those out into two accounts. Yes. But I do think most pinners are multidimensional, and that's kind of the magic of Pinterest, is that people are pinning across categories. So I wouldn't be rigid in that approach, and like if I started as a food blogger, never feel comfortable pinning about my travel, travel ideas. I feel like at some point people are following you also for your point of view on the world and, the eye that you have, which obviously extends beyond just your core category.
True. I said everything the secret that I thought wouldn't appeal.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
I still want to pin it even if nobody else cares about it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question from Kate. Does your audience sharing from your site to Pinterest send an engagement signal to Pinterest that it's important?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yep, exactly. So that's also something that we see as, someone else thought this content was useful too and saved it to Pinterest. It used to be that every time someone did that, it would be seen by Pinterest as kind of a different pin saved by someone else. And that's a change that we made a couple of years ago, where we now see all instances of a pin that shares an image and a link as the same. So that's why we're unifying, for example, look at the comments on the pins and the tries on the pins too. And so anyone else who's saving that same piece of content from your site all of the goodness of that pin will be wrapped into the pin that you had originally saved.
Sounds like a good recipe.
Yeah.
So does switching your website from HTTP to HTTPS affect its performance on Pinterest?
Ooh, good question. Not that I know of. I know that one of the pain points that I've heard in the past is that we would basically treat two versions of a pin differently. So if one pin had a link that started with HTTP and one had a link that started with HTTPS, for example, you might see those appear separately in analytics as an example. And that's a change that we're going to make in response to that feedback. So we will basically ignore the difference in those for the sake of analytics going forward.
Okay.
Keep them the same. I would say in general, like, the better the landing page quality, the better it serves your pin. So if HTTPS is a more optimal setting for your audience and for security, then I would definitely focus on that. There's no downside to making that switch on our end.
Okay, cool. So some questions about numbers, the difference between monthly viewers and monthly engaged in analytics.
Yeah, sure. So monthly viewers are kind of all people that see your pin. They're literally viewers. Monthly engagers are anyone that does something with your pin. So I believe that's inclusive of people who close up on it, click through on it, save it, etc. It's kind of the unique sum of all of those.
Okay, and that's kind of related to the brand new,
No, sorry. I was saying it's the sum of all unique people who take one of those types of actions.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then kind of related to the business profile where it has monthly reach, what does that include? Is that the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Same as monthly viewers.
Yeah, exactly. You might see if you're looking in your audience analytics and you're looking on your profile itself, you might see a slight discrepancy in those numbers. I think it's like literally like a slight time lag or something between the two. Yeah. But they are, in theory, the same thing. So you should be relatively the same numbers. Yeah.
Excellent. And we have another question from an SEO person. How long does it take for a pin to rank for a keyword?
Ooh, good question. Actually, this is one of the biggest reasons that we've been introducing things like hashtags and like the following tab so that we can jumpstart distribution much faster. So I don't know the exact answer on this one, to be honest, in terms of like amount of time. But I will say that with these updates, that time is shrinking. So you should see it happening fairly quickly, especially if it's getting engaged with.
Okay, great. And then as far as using your hashtags in the description, does it make a difference if you incorporate them into the pin description or if you put them in afterwards as a short list?
No, I don't think it makes any difference.
Okay. Okay. So those were the main questions. We still have some others that I'll go back in and respond to, and you're welcome to as well if you like. But is there anything else you would like to add?
No, just thank you so much for all of your engagement, for all of your questions, for bearing with our ever-changing guidance. I know that it takes a lot of work to keep up with a platform like ours where we're constantly experimenting and making new product changes. But we're so grateful and so excited to continue to partner with all of you to get your great content in front of our pinners. So keep checking in on our best practices. We'll make sure that document stays really up to date as things change. Yes. But thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and let me share the best practices page because, there are so many little gems that appear on there that when you least expect it. So that is shared in the chat, as well as the creative approach to Pinterest page, which is another one with some great best practices on it. The Pinterest blog as well is where you get to see all kinds of new features that come out. And then if you want more, like you want to know how to put all these best practices into play for your own business with a strategy that works and understanding analytics, I'm going to be doing a live webinar on May 9th, and there's a link to sign up for that in the chat as well.
I can't wait to do that and ask you so many questions.
It's only fair, right? Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate your time. We've learned so much. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.